With the abrupt exit of Matt Cawthon from Season 1 in Episode 6 of The Wheel of Time, we were left wondering just how exactly the show would go about reintroducing him in Season 2 with Donald Finn now taking over the role of Matt. And now we've gotten the confirmation of how that is going to be brought onto the screen, thanks to a very short but interesting scene that happened in Episode 7. Now, this scene involved Moiraine while talking to Lord Aegormar's sister, Lady Amelisa, and in the scene she asked her to essentially send a letter to Tar Valon, and most importantly of all, the really interesting detail of that letter would be it would be sent to the Red Ajah.
There is a man that they must find. A boy, really. Matt Cawthon.
And to whom should I send this message?
The Red Ajah.
Now, as we know, it's well documented both in the world within the show, but also for us readers of the books, that the Red Ajah absolutely despise men in general, let alone male channelers. And so it was a very interesting choice that the writers went with having Moiraine tell Lady Amelisa to send a letter to the Red Ajah to go after a young boy by the name of Matt Cawthon. Now, of course, what does this all mean for Season 2 and how is this all going to play out? So some of this is going to be very kind of speculative because, of course, we have one final episode of this first season, episode 8, to go through. And so we might have certain characters maybe bite the dust, and then that will change what we unnecessarily would be seeing in the second season. And that is exactly what we saw happen within episode 8, as Lady Amelisa, the woman Moiraine asked to send a letter to the White Tower, sadly died in the field of battle as she burned herself out using too much of the One Power in the destruction of the Trolloc army, which to me was a bit of a contentious moment. So when it comes to Matt and having that letter sent, they're going to automatically think this is, when it comes to the Red Ajah, that he is a false dragon, and so he's a man very much of interest to them. Now, I think obviously with the introduction of Donald Finn, things are going to have to be spun in certain manners and certain ways in terms of maybe kind of explaining within the show's kind of story of why this kind of change has occurred in terms of how Matt will be looking in Season 2. And I can think of a couple possible ways that they could go about that. Now, of course, they could also choose to go in a complete opposite direction and not include any sort of story points as to why Matt's appearance has changed on the show, other than the fact that it's been quite obviously a change of actors in the role. Now, what I think is going to be played out is this. So, I believe Moiraine obviously has a hidden agenda when it comes to having this letter sent to the Red Ajah. Yes, I do think she wants him picked up by an Aes Sedai and brought back to the tower. But I think the reason she went about having the Reds go about doing this is because, number one, she knows they will go after any man, especially when it's implied he is a male channeler. Now, I think if she had asked Lady Amelisa to send this letter to any other Ajah, they wouldn't have necessarily gone after him straight away, and he would have most likely been forgotten about because there's obviously more matters that are of importance to these Ajahs. But of course, Moiraine, knowing how the Red Ajah operate and their hatred of men and male channelers, this will of course be the perfect Ajah to send that letter to, because not only will they have the implication of him being a potential male channeler kind of hidden and summarized within this letter that will be sent to them, this will of course no doubt be on the top of their agenda, because anytime a male channeler is presumed to be found out in the wild, so to speak, they will go off and go and find him and bring him back and gentle him. Now, of course, we all know Matt cannot channel, but the whole main point of this is to have Matt be found by these sisters and brought back to the tower. And that was the whole point of Moiraine sending it to the Red Ajah, to get him back to a place of safety, albeit in the hands of the Red Ajah, for a moment or two in the story. So we've got that kind of portion out of why the letter was sent. It brings Mat back into the show, back into the White Tower. So interestingly, that's where we can kind of stop with why they went with that route. Now, of course, we've come to the part in the video where we have to sort of discuss and think about what type of story we're going to get with Mat once he's reintegrated with the group and the show in season 2 with the new addition of Donald Finn in the role, and what impacts the kind of story points that happened within the final episode have on Mat and his story moving forward. Because as we saw, of course, there are 3 different things which will have an impact on Mat's story in season 2. Now, of course, these are what's on the screen right now, where you can see Lady Amelisa being burned out. So we've got the question of, did the letter get sent before she killed herself, essentially? At number 2, we have Padan Fain, of course, in possession of the Shadar-Logoth dagger within Faldara, as we saw. And of course, he has the Horn of Valir. And then finally, we also have the storyline, which was no doubt supposed to be for Mat, having to be shifted over to Perrin for season 2, because of course with the departure of Barney Harris, they had to rewrite the story and the scripts for these final 2 episodes very quickly. And so the biggest things we have to worry about is, what do all these 3 or 4 pieces of plot that happened in these final couple of episodes have when it comes to Mat? Now, I think a few of them will be quite easy to solve. For example, when we are speaking of the letter being sent to the Red Ajah from Moiraine, it can either go one of 2 ways. Lady Amelisa did send it before the events that happened in episode 8, and in that case the Reds will be in possession of the letter and will be looking for Mat, no doubt, who, ironically enough, that we saw at the end of episode 8, or kind of within the beginnings or middle of the 8th episode, he made his way back to Tar Valon. Now, of course, we only saw him at the kind of gates of one of the entrances to Tar Valon, so that still leaves a little bit of room and scope for the Red Sister to kind of pick him up before he makes it into the tower of his own, accord. Or we can go the other route. The letter was never sent, and so they don't have to kind of have an issue of playing around with what that would kind of bring in for those particular portions and of Mat's story, I should say. So that's out of the way. Then we now get to the main issues at hand with what happened in those couple story points that would have a lot to do surrounding Mat. Now, of course, before his departure, we could all quite clearly see the scenes that were involving Perrin with Padan Fain would no doubt have gone to Mat, because they had already set those up in the first episode with his interactions with Padan Fain, and him being the only person of the Emond's Field 5 having an interaction with him. So that was quite clearly something they had planned. And of course that would be following the story very much to point with kind of the end of or the kind of portion in when Padan Fain steals the dagger but also the Horn of Valir. And then Mat obviously then has to go with Rand and the rest of the kind of military accompanying Rand when they go out to go and find and track Padan Fain, who has the Horn of Valir. Now, a lot of other things were changed and put out of place. For example, the Horn of Valir just ended up being underneath the throne in Faldara, so that's a hell of a change, and so that has a knock-on effect for those particular story points. But of course, those have all happened and there's nothing we can do about that, so that kind of has to be brushed under the rug. This is what we've got, this is how it's going. So now we have the issues of the story now having gone to Perrin, and Perrin's going to be most likely the one going about tracking down Padan Fain. Now, of course, with the reintroduction of Mat into the group, they could easily just kind of slide and insert him into that particular story point once again quite easily. We could have maybe 10 or 15 minutes of Donald Finn. There we go. Donald Finn, you know, in Tar Valon getting, you know, completely healed. Maybe they will do something with that, and you could have that as a way of changing his face. Or the kind of taint of Shadow the Goth could kind of envelope Matt's face, and then we get a new face reveal, and that's just a side effect. I don't think they would do that, but that's what they could do. But I think we'll kind of get some shots and scenes of the new Matt, if you want to call him that, or just Matt in general in Tar Valon, interacting with the Red Ajah and the Aes Sedai once he's been healed and before. And then they'll most likely find a way. This is the story and the writers of Matt doing what Matt does best and sneaking his way out of Tar Valon and finding out where his friends have gone after the events of what happened in Faldara. And I think he'll most likely end up being part of the story with Perrin and him tracking down Padan Fain. Now I think that is what we're most likely going to see. I think it could be those two going with a group of Faldaran soldiers, if there's any left. We don't really know, do we? We know Loyal is there, and we also know Uno is still alive. So that could be a small group of what we could know in particular could go on a hunt for the dagger, and I think they all have an invested interest in why they would want to go and do that. So I think that is most likely how they're going to, you know, fit Matt back into the story and what his story is most likely going to be in this second season. That's the way I see it playing out. But of course, that is just my opinion. You guys might have a slightly different one. I would love to know what you all particularly think might be how they reintroduce Matt into the show in season 2, but also into the wider Emmonsfield 5 gang again, and what his story could be. I'm sure you might have a completely different kind of idea in your minds of how this is all going to pan out. But that's just how I see it, of course. Anyway, that is the end of the video. I hope you've all enjoyed it. It's going to be really interesting to see what they do with the character and what all the other kind of story points are going to be in the second season once we get around to seeing it. As we all know, they are currently filming, so I would say they have at least 2, if not 3 episodes already wrapped up and in the bag, because that was something talked about in one of the articles, if I'm not mistaken, from someone from Amazon Prime, or just Amazon in general. So yeah, anyway guys, hope you've enjoyed the video. If you have, please leave a thumbs up on it, and any comments that you have, please do leave in the comment section down below. Right everyone, I'll catch you all later in another Wheel of Time video.